Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Petros Fasoulas. I head the European Movement International office here in Brussels. And I am delighted, but also regretful to see such a full room, but a small shortage in supplies of chairs. So I think the quicker we can start the conversation and engage you intellectually, the faster you will forget about your aching feet. Nevertheless, I am indeed very happy to see that the subject of enlargement remains very much in the minds and hopefully the hearts also of people here in Brussels, both in the institutions, civil society and beyond, because you don't need me to tell you, it's one of the most crucial areas of activity for the European Union, but also the European movement on our side. We have been, of course, for those of you who are not familiar with the European movement, we have been around for nearly 8 decades now. We actually predate the European Union itself. We were set up to advocate for European integration, for peace and reconciliation of our continent. And we have been doing this for the last 8 years. And there is no better example of that idea of peace and reconciliation than the process of enlargement. You know, the idea of bringing all European states into the family that we call European Union. And to that end, we work very closely all across our continent and, of course, with stakeholders here in Brussels. And for that reason, you know, we are extremely proud and privileged to be hosted in the European Parliament, and we're thankful to Vladimir and your team for that hospitality. But we're also very lucky to have an excellent panel around us, bringing together both policymakers here in Brussels, think tanks, but also, most importantly, perhaps, civil society stakeholders from the region itself. So we're looking forward to a very rich discussion. Many of you have been active in this area, so we're also looking forward to hearing from you too. The discussion is being live streamed, so people from the region, but also across Europe, will be listening in. We have microphones, so once the time comes for the discussion to take place, don't forget to use them. The Wi-Fi details are next to the door over there. My colleagues are pointing to them. And yes, considering we are quite so many, we'll try to see how we can involve everyone. But maybe first I will introduce a little bit our panel. You all know from the registration who we are. But with us, we have, of course, Vladimir Prebelic, who is a member of the European Parliament, very active in this field. We also have Thomas Haglinger. I knew I was going to mispronounce it, the head of unit for enlargement strategy and coordination at the newly renamed, re-established DG for enlargement and Eastern neighborhood, ENEST. I like it. It works. It works.
You're one of the first ones who likes it, but okay, we'll get used to it.
Yeah. Next to me is Dragana Đurica, who is the Secretary General of the European Movement in Serbia. We also have Ilariana Gzoni, who is a research analyst at Carnegie Europe. Gledis Cipali, who is Executive Director of European Movement in Albania. And of course, Corina Stratulat, who is Associate Director and Head of European Politics and Institutions at the European Policy Center. And before we hear from all of that, from all our speakers, Vladimir, I'd like to invite you to give us an introductory note.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I'm really honored to have you here today. I'm astonished about how many people are present in this debate. This shows us clearly that enlargement is really, I would say, the thing within European Union, should remain so. Coming from Slovenia, we joined European Union in 2004. It was also a really long process, but nevertheless, we somehow managed it. And you mentioned before, European Union also got, you would all know, the Nobel Prize for Peace. And this is really important to understand. Why? Because being a military historian, this is the largest, should be the largest time without a war on the European continent. So bringing countries in, offer them what we can offer. And this is human rights. Basically, we will call them basic values of the democracy, but also welfare. Basically keeps us together, not to wage war against us, but being friendly, open, and prosperous. So this is why the enlargement process is important. I'm also happy to say, and you would know that, of course, after the commission was confirmed, lady that is commissioner for enlargement comes also from Slovenia. There is a small interesting thing. We both were running for the president of Slovenia. She dropped off, but I continued, so I wasn't really successful. This is why I'm sitting here in the European Union today. But nevertheless, to, let's say, bring few things to your attention. Being here in European Parliament, I'm also working hardly on how to bring closer as soon as possible Western Balkans region, because this will say is also my region, and understand the complex, to a certain extent, complexity of the region, but also challenges that are there. When we talk about the enlargement, of course, we talk about both sides. And let me be a little bit critical on our European side. Hopefully nobody will, take me to heart on this, but still, since we talk about enlargement, everybody, two sides should do their homework. And let's start with the European Union. Of course, we are trying to be so-called merit-based principles. So we would like countries that will be future members to bring certain results to the table. But I would also say maybe we are not really successful in this process, because if we would be successful, then a lot of countries would be far closer than are they today. Where I see the challenges, the first one is so-called unanimity in decision making. This is something that was challenged already. Germany and Slovenia are forerunner of this proposal. So this qualified majority voting should be introduced in the areas of opening and closing the chapters of negotiations. Why? This could make things easier, swifter, and still nobody will take harm. Why? Because at the end of the day, before any country would like to enter the European Union, you have to have unanimity of all member countries. So why should we drag too far and too long with certain things that could be resolved closer, sooner? And of course, this will also mean that we would like to underline so-called decoupling issues. Of course, every country has bilateral issues. Even Slovenia had, with my dear friend from Croatia, some open issues while we were accessing European Union. But we wouldn't like that those issues would hinder the process of enlargement, would hinder countries that work and are trying their best to get closer to European Union. The second thing that is also on our behalf to be taken into account is a credibility issue. You would know that in many cases we promise things, and unfortunately, as European Union, we do not deliver as promised. Not to mention North Macedonia. I think we should really change this kind of an attitude, being more honest and transparent in this process, and try not to be a so-called bias or unclear. Also, when it comes to Serbia, and I have to be really honest and open with you, I'm not really happy that the Commission, as the college, or the European Union as a whole, did not put a stronger voice into the things that are developing today in Serbia. I think that the students who are protesting today are on the right side of the history and should be supported as such. And unfortunately, only few are raising voices over this topic. But this is also us bringing us to the thing, credibility issues. And if we mean something, we really have in the end also to deliver. And the third thing I would like to also emphasize is the gradual integration as intermediate step. So we know we have a growth plan today. We try to support countries who are performing a certain activities so that they will be, let's say, having some benefits out of the process. But I will go even further. I think we would need swifter, let's say, benefits for the countries who are negotiating. For example, I will give you Ukraine and Moldova, who got some benefits in trade issues like trade facilitation and abolition of roaming fees. This is something that could maybe go swifter from our side towards the countries, getting closer to the European Union. And not only that, I also advocate strongly that the growth plan should be also more financed in next MFF, and that funds should be more available for the countries even before they enter European Union. There is an ongoing debate also in the European Parliament. Some parliamentarians see that like, why should we spend money on countries that are not members yet today? But my perception is that just the opposite. Let's see this money being spent in the countries who are accessing, like investments to the countries that will be of course, at the end of the day, member of the European Union. So the prism and perspective is also essential to understand. And finally, not to drag too long, because there are smarter people than I am to make some comments. I have to be honest with you. I'll be visiting Montenegro. I'll be visiting North Macedonia, also Serbia. What we all would like to see is also what can more be done on behalf of the other side, of the countries who are negotiating. Of course, they're always specific. We understand that. But I think it is a very important moment is you being here today. So we understand that certain political elites, while they try to outplay, outmaneuver, or whatever, not to achieve, but having it at the same time. Well, this is like a certain bulk way of understanding. Also in Slovenia was that in that case. But, I think three things should be really in front of us. First, this is a national effort. If some certain country would like to be a member of the European Union, this is a national effort. So we all have to work on this behalf. The second thing, the membership should not be taken the prisoner by certain political party or elite, regardless who we talk about, because it's a common effort that we have to work together. And of course, civil society should be strongly supported. This is something that also was underlining when talking about the growth plan, that money should not always be there just for the infrastructural projects, but more money should be available for civil society to be supported, and then that civil society will exact certain pressure on political elites to do more, because I'm strongly believing that not all political elites do their best job. Sorry to be honest with you today. So if we all will work together hand in hand, everything is possible, and we really need to bring Western Balkans closer to the European Union, or even to integrate it, because this is beneficial for everything. It's beneficial for the region, it's beneficial for the European Union, and most importantly, is beneficial for Europeans on the continent. Thank you very much.
Well, I couldn't agree more, as you can imagine, but I think you set the scene very nicely for the discussion we're planning to have. But you also gave me the ideal assist, somebody would have thought we coordinated, to invite perhaps our colleagues from the region to give us a little bit their assessment from the ground, both in terms of the progress of negotiation from the perspective of the countries they come from, but also an assessment of the political, economic, and social conditions, and how public opinion perhaps is responding to some of the things you very acutely highlighted. Perhaps, Dragana, I can start with you. Serbia was mentioned. We've seen the news. Perhaps it's not in the news as much as we would like to. On our side, from the European Union, we're trying to be as vocal as possible to raise awareness, both here in Brussels, but also to communicate or to fill that communication vacuum that you correctly pointed out the Commission has left by not being more vocal on what's going on the streets of Belgrade and across Serbia. But before, we don't want to make this just about the protests that have been taking place in the last few months. We want to look a little bit more about where is enlargement at the moment. How is the process viewed in the region? How are the challenges that Vladimir outlined are perceived, both the challenges that we are facing as the EU, but also the challenges that you are facing there vis-a-vis your government and others. And that is then I will come to you. Dragana.
Thank you, Petros. Thank you very much. Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming here, and also thank you, my colleagues from the European Movement International, for organizing this event. And we see it as very important because we see the enlargement, something which has been our primary mission, and joining the EU has been our primary mission ever since the beginning of the European movement in Serbia. Since 1992, we're advocating for the implementation of the European values in the country, and ever since the story of membership has become actual, we have been strongly advocating Serbia's place in the EU as a fully fledged member. However, the reality is a bit challenging, so to say, and I have a feeling that every year I say we're standing at the critical juncture. So as much as I would like to avoid this term, unfortunately, I still have to use it. In terms of enlargement, let's say from the official level, Serbia has made some progress in some areas. moderate progress, so to say, in some areas pertaining to economic parameters, economic criteria, competitiveness, and so on. However, for years and years in a row, we did not manage to fulfill the criteria regarding the fundamental values and the fundamental requirements of the EU, which are the rule of law, democratic institutions, and free media. And this is something which is taking its toll right now seriously. So on the enlargement and on the negotiation process, pretty much whoever works in the European administration is informed through the number of reports and everything which is happening. However, this non-ability to comply with the fundamental values of the EU is taking its toll on the society, on the economy, and also on Serbia's ranking in the international level. Because according to all of the reports that are issued either by the Freedom House or Transparency International and so on, we have recorded, unfortunately, backsliding. And this is, I always feel very sad when I have to talk about this, because even though as a civil society, our job is mainly to criticize and to challenge the government, but for the sake of being better, not only to promote how badly we're doing. So we are not happy about this. And the most recent events, Petros, which you have said, have shown that people have started realizing this too, but we have a serious issue in my country regarding the perception of the European Union amongst people. As Mr. Prebilic said, this should be a national project. This should be a national endeavor, not only of the government, but also of the citizens. In my country, the communication about the EU accession, about the benefits of joining the EU, about the values of the European Union, have not been quite well communicated to the citizens. And as a result, we have the highest Euroscepticism in the past 20 years, and even more critical, mostly among youth. Our recent research has shown that we have done in the European movement in Serbia has shown that the majority of the people aged between 45 and 60 are, let's say, 60% and more towards the EU integration. People with children are mostly oriented in a positive way towards the EU integration of the country. This shows a lot. This is a generation who has been growing up in the 90s and knows what isolation is from its neighborhood, from the rest of the Europe as well. However, among youth, the situation is completely the opposite. Almost 2/3 of young people are against joining the EU in Serbia. And when you take a better look, you see that this is the generation, the most critical age is between 16 and 25. So this is the generation which has, let's say, developed its opinion and critical thinking over the course of the past 10 years. And this is something which has to be addressed, and these young people have to be addressed. On the other side, we have sort of a dissonance, let's say, is that another part of our research showed that the same group of young people, when you ask them, where would you like to study, where would you like to travel, where would you like to emigrate, which is also another critical question that we have to deal with in my country, are exactly countries of the European Union in the vast majority. So obviously there is a huge gap in communication where, we have to invest, the European Union, ourselves, and also our governments should invest more efforts in explaining to these young people, yes, but this, what you are seeking beyond our borders, let's bring it here. Let's bring it home in very simple words. We from the European movement in Serbia are very much dedicated to this. We are actually going on tours around Serbia and talking to citizens directly, reaching out through our local councils network that we have. But this has to be done on a much higher level, and this has to be communicated by the political elites, because what the perception is right now is that the European integration process is something which happens, let's say, on a high political level, in a very technocratic and administrative language, which is sometimes not easy to understand by the citizens, and that the EU is imposing some, let's say, conditions on us, which are going to hinder our, let's say, traditional values, which is all completely wrong. The citizens of Serbia need to understand, number one, that this is the ambition of our country, that this is the ambition of all of us together, and that we should all invest our best efforts in making it happen, as much the administration as much as the citizens. So this is lacking. The another thing is that the citizens have also seen in the past years before the growth plan, the enlargement fatigue, which we have all talked about in the past, and I would really not like to repeat it. And this is something which has also influenced the citizens' opinion. The third point that we also have to take into account that the EU is not the only player in the game, that we also have third country influence in our country, basically Russia and China, especially through economic influence, and that we have high scale investments also, and not all of them being benevolent towards the EU integrations. So this is why the EU has to make its presence stronger. It has to make its presence more direct, and it has to make its presence directed towards the citizens of our country in order to show them that this is not the process which concerns only political elites, but it actually concerns them, their lives, and their work, their education, the services that they're getting from administration and so on. So this is how would I say the general part, and regarding the details on the other things you have mentioned, we can do it in the second part of the panel.
Indeed. No, this is a good way, I think, to set the scene a little bit and give a context. But we will come back to some of the issues you touched, because I have a lot of them as questions over here. But before I do that, also I'll invite perhaps Gledis to give us the perspective from Albania, and how is the enlargement process being perceived there? What is the degree of public support still for the European project, and how are the government is also moving forward with it, and many other things that we're going to come back to shortly.
Thank you, Petros, for organizing this event, and also from the European Parliament for hosting us, Mr. Preljic. I want just to go through a couple of issues. I mean, we have many similarities in the Balkans, but also we differ on different issues. One of them, fortunately, is that the support for EU enlargement is very high in Albania continually. It doesn't have changed in the last 20 years, which is surprisingly, and it's around 90%. Fortunately, we don't have political forces or movements against the EU, and that is a very positive sign, and that makes our job easier, of course, as a European movement. The other issue is that unfortunately, and this goes also to the issue of the voting, the unanimity, that the countries in the Balkans have had different stages of development, and also getting closer, sometimes far away from EU, and it has not always been when some countries are progressing, some others are not. And unfortunately, the coupling or getting the countries together has served more to delay the ones who do well than attract the ones who are not doing so well, as we have seen, unfortunately, with North Macedonia, when for the first time we delayed them, and then they delayed us. So it was not a win-win situation. And it has much to do with the way of the voting mechanism, also with the particularity of the region, of the relation between neighbors. That, of course, there always be issues that need to be resolved. But this should not make us lose the big picture of the transformative process that enlargement and joining the EU is for our countries and societies. And I also wanted to stress what my colleague said about the process that is for the whole society. It's true, and that is why we work a lot to explain that it's not just the government task to do it. We should do it all together. because we are not sure that the government will always be that determined, that will always continue to follow the good principles that make the European Union. And we have experience on that many times. We had done one step forward and then two steps backwards. Hope it's not the case anymore. In the last years, we are doing good and great. I should say very positive outcome in the process in Albania, and this has been a revitalization. We can see even the public administration of the energy, because being that long in the system also discourages people. There are generations of young people who have left the country, and this is a problem not only for Albania particularly, but for the whole region, that people now do not find other alternatives because there is a war or there is political instability, but because there are other social and economic opportunities better for their future and future of their kids. And this is diminishing the opportunities of development of our country and the region as a whole, which has long-term consequences, not just something that with the changing of political elites can be addressed. So there are many issues that we should focus at the same time in this changing and very dynamic world. So not only Europe, but we see now that there are dangers and risks coming everywhere, not only from the enemies, but also from friends and partners. So thank you.
It is indeed a funny time when you cannot tell who is your enemy and who is your ally anymore. But certainly, we get the feeling already that the challenges are acute, but also they are visible. And the Commission has indeed been working closely with all candidate countries, especially those in the Western Balkans, to facilitate their path towards EU membership. So maybe, Thomas, having listened already to colleagues in the European Parliament and, of course, civil society, we're very much welcome to hear the European Commission's perspective on some of the challenges and the opportunities that have been raised, and maybe share with us an assessment of where we are with the process of enlargement.
Yes, thanks a lot, Pedros, and thanks for the interest on enlargement policy. Yeah? Let me just start with a few general remarks from the perspective of on the EU side, and how we see the situation from the Brussels perspective in terms of enlargement. I mean, let's sort of take a step back. We have, for the first time since quite some time, a commissioner for enlargement dedicated, coming from the country based. We have a DG for enlargement, first time since a long time, even if it's not called only enlargement, and the abbreviation is NS, as you say. By the way, first time in the European Parliament in this title. We have enlargement in all mission letters for all commissioners as a priority, important to highlight. We have the financial incentives in place to support enlargement. In fact, in terms of the Western Balkans, we have 15 billion, the IPA financial instrument. We have, since last year, a 6 billion Western Balkans facility to support the countries. If anybody has the figures that Russia and China spend in terms of donations, very happy to hear them, and you'll see how small to non-existent they are, because they're largely about, if at all, it's all about loans, which then the taxpayers in the Western Balkans are happily or unhappily paying back over a long period of time. Any case, let's not dwell on the others. So what I'm trying to say is, in terms of enlargement, seen from Brussels, seen as well from the new institutional setup. All the ingredients are there for moving forward on the enlargement path. And I think a number of decisions that have been taken as well over the last year. I don't want to be too technical, but we had Montenegro fulfilling what we call the interim benchmarks, and we've started to close chapters. Again, something we haven't done for quite some time in this phase. We've had Albania opening the fundamentals cluster, which is key in the overall accession process. We are now working towards opening the fundamentals cluster with Ukraine and Moldova, for example, and we're looking at quite a substantial number of intergovernmental conferences during the course of the Polish presidency, for example. So I think on the EU side, the readiness is there. I'm not saying there are no challenges in that you have 27 member states enthusiastically supported by their public opinions, considering that enlargement is the biggest vote winner in town. I'm not saying that, but I think at the European Council leadership level, there is a strong commitment to enlargement, and you've seen it through the decisions that have been taken. Including last year, the European Council decided to open accession negotiations with Bosnia and Herzegovina. I mean, who would have thought of that a few years ago? There are a few challenges again down the road. So I don't want to go through each of the countries individually. I briefly mentioned where we are for some of them, and we have a very substantial agenda ahead, not only in terms of the accession negotiations, but also under the growth plan. And I would like to react to some of the elements that have already been mentioned. For example, gradual integration. So what we can do prior already to accession. And this is again part of the growth plan, for example, for the Western Balkans. What we are trying to do is to identify areas where already prior to accession, some of the benefits of EU membership can be shared. To make EU accession as well more tangible. One area where we've been particularly working on over the last years, and the countries as well, is the single euro payment area. To again, if it makes transfers easier from the European Union, for example, to these countries. Amongst the countries, World Bank estimates 500 million of savings for citizens. So it's not for governments, it's not for banks. It's for those who make the transfers. And there we've had, the charm of all of that is that it is not an alternative to enlargement, but it is kind of work. It is the same work that needs to be done, because in order to stay with SEPA as an example, in order to get there, countries need to align their legislation. They need to align the payment and banking legislation. They need to align the anti-money laundering legislation, and all of that makes the subsequent work in the accession negotiations easier and hopefully faster. We've had already decisions now for Montenegro and Albania to become part of SEPA. We hope that other countries will follow soon. And we are trying to look at this as well for other areas that citizens feel particularly roaming again is one of those. We'd also like to move faster, but it's not obvious it's complicated legally, etc. But again, there is a lot of willingness to try and work and get countries into the single market. Is wherever possible, encouraging as well a common regional market, by the way, within the region built on EU rules and standards. That would also help. And it would be something for all the countries, whether they are in accession negotiations, where the accession negotiations move a bit slower, but it's something where all 6 of the Western Balkans can participate. A last word before I stop, because this the issue came up several times on this broad consensus on enlargement, and I think I would like, just as someone who has worked for 20 years on enlargement in various shapes countries, share one conviction or one conclusion. I mean, enlargement or joining the European Union is it's not like joining NATO, for example, with all due respect to our friends in EVR. But NATO also has standards about the refueling of fighter jets. I don't underestimate that, very important. But we, the European Union, is a single market. It is a customs union. We have a number of common policies, etc. All that to say, it is a process that takes time. Number one, simply it takes time for anybody, wherever the country would be located, whether it's Iceland in the North Atlantic or any country of the Western Balkans. Secondly, it involves everybody in the country. It's not a process for a few diplomats, a few civil servants. It requires the involvement of the entire society and economy. It's impossible to do enlargement, say, without having the farmers on board, or the fishermen, for those concerned, or whoever. Number two, and number three, what's required is that there is, if a country, that's a sovereign choice of a country to apply for EU membership. But if a country takes the sovereign decision to join for EU membership, it's a very bad idea to use it for party political purposes and to work on the basis of a 51% majority. This doesn't work. And we have the examples. I mean, very different. I'm not judging, but we've had countries like Iceland, where you have an election, the country is stopping. Now, by the way, they're reconsidering, but you have Georgia. I mentioned another example, where this consensus, at least at the level of the political elites, is not there. You have a very large, broad majority of Georgian citizens, for example. So I think these are the ingredients that need to be there. You need to have the broad societal and political majority. I don't say there needs to be a consensus. And then the other thing is that what we need is, of course, we need civil society. No doubt. And by the way, a lot of money, we are funding civil society like no one else. Let's also be clear about it. And obviously, we're very much supportive of civil society holding their governments to account. But what we need as well, and coming back to what I said before, the European Union has about 150,000 pages of acquis. So we need to have these 150,000 pages of legislation on the statute book of candidate countries. Now, who's going to do that? Governments and parliaments. We need governments and functioning parliaments that are dedicated and focused on this work. Without that, all geopolitical considerations will still be there, but they'll remain considerations. The geopolitical opportunity that is now there for the enlargement countries, and I'll finish on that, will only materialize if governments and parliaments do not drop the ball, but remain focused and seize this opportunity now. And this requires a lot of technical and practical work on legislation, on rule of law, on alignment to the acquis. But if they go down that road, I think the opportunity to move fairly fast is there. Thanks.
Thank you, Thomas. That was indeed, very, very interesting. And I mean, you said it yourself. The EU is a community of values and standards, not just a single market, a customs union, and a significant body of legislative measures, but indeed a space for democracy and the respect for human rights. And I would be amiss if I didn't perhaps encourage you maybe to share a few thoughts about the current situation and the massive protests that are taking place in Serbia, which are not about EU membership as such, but I think it have to do a lot with questions that are very central to a country's accession path. The Commission has been a little bit reluctant to comment beyond the letter that we saw recently from the Commissioner for Enlargement. We would expect a bit more commentary, perhaps, considering how massive the mobilization from ordinary citizens has been. What is the view in the Commission? Is the mobilization of students something that we should indeed take note and support?
I mean, I think I don't want to sound like our spokesperson, but we don't necessarily provide a running commentary on political developments in the country. I think we've made very clear how important it is, freedom of expression, to be able to fully use it, to be heard. We've been in our reports, and I think what we've heard before about Serbia, all the criticism we've heard. If you look into our annual report, for example, on Serbia, you find all of that in there. So we have been vocal in our and very sharp in our analysis, where we see the problems, the gaps, the challenges, the lack of trust in political authorities. That is, and now we have this process within the country, and I'm also not sure that the European Commission is necessarily best placed to comment on candidate countries. Of course, we will continue raising our voice if we see that this goes into the wrong direction. What we would hope is that this energy that is there, we see as well, will in fact manage to move Serbia forward, because if you take a step back, and we're from Brussels seeing we are taking a step back, Serbia has a crucial role in terms of enlargement for the Western Balkans. It has the situation in Serbia, its relations with Kosovo, for example, has a huge regional impact, but it also has a big impact on the enlargement policy as such. Looking at a certain balance between the East, Ukraine, Moldova in particular, and the Western Balkans. In all of that, Serbia plays an important role. And but what I said generally before, I think there is also an opportunity for Serbia to move forward. And I think this is something that hopefully the current developments will encourage as well in Serbia.
And I'm sure we have the opportunity to come back to this too, because the mobilization at the moment is so big, it's very hard to, and it has been going on for a while indeed. But before that, maybe, Corina, I'll come to you, and thanks for patiently waiting and listening to all this, because central to the discussion around enlargement is also the degree to which the European Union is prepared, and the degree to which the European Union also should change, whether it's institutionally or in any other way, to be able to accommodate these new members. So having followed the process of enlargement over the last decades, I would say, give us away how old we are maybe, but it has been going on for a while. Do you think that today, having revitalized the discussion around EU enlargement, which has stalled, for better or worse, for a long time, and having new candidate countries also joining the Western Balkans, is the EU anywhere nearer ready to inviting and welcoming and accommodating new member states?
Right. Thank you, Petros, and thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity. What can be added to everything that has already been said, and to which with which I mostly agree. I think it was at the beginning that we heard about the fact that both sides need to do their homework, and I think that is very much correct. That the EU, of course, is in a position to set demands, to set the bar very as high as it wishes to set it, but it also has to do that for itself, and it has its own set of obligations. And I think that that is triggered by the enlargement process, but I think it goes beyond that, meaning that given the times and age in which we live, it's not only enlargement that is pushing the EU in the direction of change. I think perma crisis requires perma change, if you wish. So there's the urgency or the imperative for change is triggered by enlargement, but also beyond that, by the context in which we live. Having said that, I do feel that I take a bit of issue with the way we look at the problem and how we see it and how we speak about it. So it's true that there is an imperative for enlargement, there is an imperative for change, but I do have the feeling that, enlargement has become, that dossier on which the Union has to deliver, either because, well, we made all these commitments and promises in Thessaloniki back then, or because now we have Putin and Trump and other mean bad guys out there breathing down our necks. And I feel that the more the EU tries to act out of obligation because of promises made, or out of fear because, oh my God, the world is such a mean big place, the more it puts the EU in a victim position, And I think when you try to act from a victim position and you victimize yourself, I think you cannot really get that far or really in a meaningful way. Yes, enlargement can be potentially accomplished in some way. Maybe some countries will come in, or maybe all of them will eventually come in. Who knows? Maybe not. Maybe we will continue to drag our feet. But even if enlargement does happen, if that's the premise on the basis of which you work to accomplish enlargement, then it's likely that the new members will have a rather lukewarm welcome in the EU. This will foster tensions and misgivings, and then it will work against unity. You will fuel further fragmentation, further disunity, which basically defeats the purpose or the logic of having the geopolitical logic of having enlargement in the first place. So I think I believe that we first, before we think or when we think about change, the first thing is probably we need to change how we talk and think about enlargement. And it cannot be that we do it for all these negative reasons. We have to give it a positive spin, that enlargement is in our self-interest. It is part of our own evolution. We do have a choice. We're not forced by outside. We shouldn't externalize the problem. The problem is inside, is working with ourselves to understand that, we need to grow up, we need to change, we need to evolve, and we have choice over the way we evolve, the terms in which this evolution happens. We're not really that, there's no Tina syndrome here. There is no choice, no alternative. Yes, there are alternatives, but we need to step into our power also about enlargement and about the other issues that need to change in order to become more agile in the world we live. But it has to come from a positive motivation, not because we have to do it or because we're pushed to do it. And, we have to take all these countries in and we don't really like them and they have problems and I don't know what, which is not, it's not even a fair way to look at it, because when you think about it, we share the same problems when it comes to democracy, when it comes to economy, when it comes to society. You name it. We have similar problems and challenges that we confront, and that brings me to the second part of the change when it comes to the talk that we accompany. That we use for enlargement, the discourse that we have, is that we also need to change a little bit the narrative from the past of big terms, semi-utopian terms, you know, prosperity, democracy, freedom, human rights, travel, opportunity, because it's not that those are no longer valid. They remain crucially important ideals for the EU and desiderata. But I mean, there's no secret that those terms are challenged also within the EU, in the member states. And so you can have an amazing recipe and, you know, put up front load conditionality and really ask the right things out of those countries. But in the end, if they look at you and in the end what you ask of them and what you say you represent is can no longer be taken at face value, then there is a hypocrisy trap in which the EU falls. And of course, this affects its credibility. It affects its ability to extract concessions from these countries. And so we need a narrative that it's more adapted to the perma-crisis era in which we live, one in which we can still mention those desiderata, but in which we work together towards them, instead of pretending that we are in a better place than the rest. So, and then of course comes the reform parts. I'm taking too long, so I will stop. But indeed, I agree with you. And if you want, I can leave it for the debate part. But when it comes to the homework that the EU has to do in terms of adapting its institutions, its values, its policies. I mean, the Commission is in the process of having a policy review, right? That will hopefully put a little bit more meat on what is necessary. But ultimately, again, it's also the member states with a new perspective, equipped with a better, more positive perspective, with a new discourse and narrative on enlargement. They should approach the idea of reform, internal reform, as an opportunity and something that it's inevitable and we will have to keep doing. We're forever work in progress. And that needs to accompany enlargement. The two can go hand in hand, which hopefully will also allow the dossier to advance quicker and with will feed positively also in the region. Because of course, if the countries in the region will help with the credibility problem, because if the countries in the region, and not only also with the trio countries, right, the Eastern trio, I mean, if they see that the EU itself does the homework that needs to be done, hopefully this will be a signal that the EU is serious about enlargement, and it's it has geopolitical muscle. And that will also potentially motivate the reform forces in these places as well. Sorry if I've taken too long.
This is one of the subjects that we can write whole PhDs, and I know that some are indeed. But it's true, there is a degree of schizophrenia also in the way that the EU is communicating around enlargement. And the institutional makeup doesn't help, but also the diversity of opinion among member states contributes to that end. Liliana, I know you've been listening to all this, and I have to admit the one aspect that is also coming up quite a lot, but haven't touched perhaps as exclusively as we should, is the geopolitical aspect. We are talking very much about the competition of values and ideologies that are influencing very much the process of enlargement. And it is one of the driving forces also behind the EU's desire to incorporate these countries. How do you think that the war in Ukraine and the general geopolitical balance at the moment, the role China plays in the region, but also, the most recent occupant of the White House, how is all that influencing a little bit the process of enlarging the Union and the way the EU is treating the subject?
First of all, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see you so numerous here. For those that don't know me, I'm Liliana Joni. I'm a native of Montenegro, of Albanian descent. And I mention this because it ties well into illustrating how important and how idealistically we have viewed the EU enlargement process in the region. I am originally as well a concert pianist who has decided to do a third master's degree in political science in order to aid my region of origin towards this great goal. And I have been living for the last 15 years in Western Europe. I hope to bring that integrated perspective, somebody that knows both these societies from within, having been born in the Western Balkans, raised there, and educated and working here in Western Europe. I would like to start on a little bit of a positive note, not to have this very dark tone, because these two countries, Montenegro, Albania, indeed have made quite some progress in the past couple of years. It has been, I don't know if that is me, it has been great to see some negotiations officially opened, chapters closed, etc. So I think that has brought even more momentum to the momentum, to so say. But where are we with the other countries? Indeed, if we are talking about geopolitics.
Let me interrupt you just for one moment. For those of us who are following the discussion online, please mute yourself. You will make the conversation much easier. Thank you.
Yes, I was going to go towards the other countries. I think some of the countries have been stalled in their process of EU integration because of the geopolitical interest that the EU has had towards certain countries of the Western Balkans. If we see Kosovo's efforts, for instance, in the past couple of years towards the democratization of the society, have not truly been taken into account when deciding whether to give it candidate status or not. The process has been completely stalled by the Pristina-Belgrade dialogue, reinforcing actually that this idea that enlargement process is not that much merit-based, but actually indeed more about this geopolitical interest in the region. And in that regard, I have to mention as well North Macedonia. What has happened with its EU accession trajectory is actually very tragic, for lack of a better word, because we have seen that they have, through the last decade, made so many concessions and worked quite hard in aligning with the EU acquis communautaire, and still their path has been time after time been stopped by bilateral issues, first with Greece, which has been solved now with Bulgaria, and of course the country and the population experiences of kind of disillusionment with the process, as no steps forward have been made. To that regard, I have to go back to this idea that actually what we see in test is the EU's strategy itself. In the region, now to the test, these protests in Serbia are the 11th hour, and it has shown, I think, that the approach which we think tankers always mention, that the EU has chosen to interact with the strong man instead of enabling or empowering civil society and the citizens for this perceived stability, short-term stability, was never going to be a sustainable goal. Elections in Serbia were called fraudulent, stolen, etc., even right here in the European Parliament. And still a year later, we were back to business as usual. And while some of us here mentioned communication and how important it is, I do agree in the reports that we experts read. Indeed, these things are brought up as issues, but what the population sees is when high officials visit in the region and tap the same leaders by saying, good job on the rule of law, for instance. And this, I think, has made a stark dent on the credibility. Next to that, credibility itself, I think, has suffered because of the lack of certain roadmaps and timelines, because it has been 10, 15 years. Not everybody is that idealistic and people have families, have kids, have old parents that need treatment. They need to see results in the more immediate term, and these have lagged. So in that sense, while there have been positive steps, and this renewed engagement has brought chapters opening, chapters closing, and a certain momentum that it seems like the EU enlargement process is much more real and palpable, it has also undermined the process itself. In my view, some points which do not get as much talked about, and there has been only a mild mention today, is also the severe brain drain which we see from the region. And at the moment we have, for instance, even countries at the EU level, countries which have nowadays much more lax citizenship laws, which have entirely opened their doors to Western Balkan highly skilled workers to leave their countries without any regard towards what will this do to the societies back home. And I think if the EU is really serious about this EU enlargement project, then I'm not saying that these countries should not welcome the workers, but maybe start thinking about some kind of circular migrations where citizens do come to give a contribution in Western countries to learn, but then are also incentivized to go back and give back to also their societies of origin, and not think about it as the EU towards candidate countries, but if the process is moving ahead, then really this will be an investment of the EU in the future EU or in the present EU, so to say. Then I wanted to come to the occupator of the White House. I think, as you have called it, I think there are many things to be said about the new Trump administration, but I want to go into a path which is not often taken, and that is the path of what could we learn from this administration. And one thing that I think we could learn is to be bold in what does the EU stand for. In my regard, and the reason why I have always seen joining the EU as such an ideal for the countries of my region, it is not only an economic project, but also this is the one project which also has human rights and the rule of law ingrained in it. I think sometimes the EU would benefit much more if it trusted this core of its identity, and we live in such a time of social media, etc., where identity is somehow at the base of how we present ourselves. We in the EU, we are a society that is highly cultured, educated. I think we could stress this much more and present ourselves much more as such, because there is a huge amount of the global world nowadays that is missing this in the global political arena. And finally, in terms of EU enlargement, I think what would give more momentum and more credibility as well would be if there would be many more exchanges happening between the EU and the Western Balkans, because I think these high-level visits, when they go well or less well, still they bring hope, and they bring this trust and faith that the EU is taking us seriously. And on the other hand, I don't think this should be done only at the highest level, but as well institutionally, colleagues should come from the Western Balkans to the EU, EU administrators, etc., should go to the Western Balkans. And finally, also people like me that live in the EU and come from the Western Balkans, who are EU citizens and who have knowledge, in-depth knowledge about these societies, could do much, much more. And I think this has not been taken into full potential so far. So I think if we integrate already inside the EU with the Western Balkans, which has this rich culture and it's full of temper and power, I think there will be place also much more for the EU in the Western Balkans. Thank you.
And that's a good reminder of the ideological and value-based purpose of enlargement. You know, it's not just about making our market bigger or ticking boxes, as Corina said. It is indeed an aspiration to expand this sphere of peace, stability, human rights, and democracy that the European Union stands for. I think it's about time you start thinking indeed about your questions, but to give you some time to formulate in your head, I'll come back to you, Vladimir, maybe for a reflection upon some of the things that were said, not least because I think the Parliament has been leading in this area, has been present on the ground. Numerous MEPs, yourself included, have indeed gone there and communicated with policymakers as well as civil society about the merits of accession. So having listened to the various stakeholders here, what are your reflections?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for all your insights. Of course, it's more, these insights are really valuable. Maybe 4 points, and that's it will be from my side. First one, I couldn't agree more. Accession to the European Union is a journey and should not be portrayed as the European Union demands something from the future member countries. And it was also in case in Slovenia, especially politicians were complaining in our country saying, oh, there is a bad Brussels always putting something forward and we have to comply with. Guys, at the end of the day, what we are trying to portray is this is beneficial, like protecting democracy, like guarding fundamentals. This is not good for the European Union. It's good for the nation. It's good for the country. It's good for everyone. So this shouldn't be even a problem. So we have to be clear on that. We have to be even more vocal. Joining the European Union is not just fulfilling the boxes, but it's making country and society better. This is the output, and not the enemy on the other side. The next thing is, I couldn't agree more about the so-called, very nice formulation, I have to say, hypocrisy trap. True. We always talk about how and when the countries will be joining, but is there really a will on the other side? And this is exactly when I talked to Ms. Marta Kos. I said, well, it's nice that we work closely with the Western Balkans, but we also have another front back home. Where is written that all the member countries will be happily endorsing new members into the family. Not all share the opinion. Of course, there is no problem more or less in the Central European Union. We are all eager to have new member countries. But there are some countries who have some reluctances, starting with France, Netherlands, and so on. They will say, well, really, do we need that in the European Union? This is home front, and who has to be challenged before, and because this will be then huge devastation, before the countries will fulfill the merits and knocking on the door, saying them after all the effort, oh, well, we don't think so. This should not happen, really. So we have to work also on this matter. When we talk about the investments with the representative of commission, of course, we invest a lot. My perception is we may not be visible as somebody else is, to be really blunt today. In Serbia, you would have bridges and highways and everything written China, here, China, there, I don't know who else. Do we have EU signs there, what we invested into? And there is much more money, I couldn't agree more, than China did. We are not good in PR, I would say. But this is the point when also civil society should help us and make it more visible, because it's also bragging yourself. We do that and that. It's not really a polite thing to do. So, and the final thing we were also discussing here, and I will wrap it up with that. What can we do that the political elites would be feeling more engaged into European Union? And just the other day, it was, of course, a very wide suggestion, I have to say, but it wasn't really a stupid one. We debated what could we do, to bring people in and feel this European spirit by themselves. Because one thing is if you go, for example, to Belgrade and talk in Skupština, but the other one will be bringing them here and sitting while decision-making process is running in the parliament. And we said, why shouldn't we try to introduce so-called observation status for those who are getting closer? So not to bringing people here, feeling European Union, how it works. Of course, they would not decide on anything, but being here and being integrated into the process may be beneficial also for them while working at home. Even somebody will say, well, this will be even encouragement for them to be, smarter, closer, more efficient when we talk about 150,000 pages of acquis communautaire to be implemented into member countries. So I will rest my case here.
I started my career actually working with accession countries for the Commission and facilitating the participation of their administrations in EU projects. And it was remarkably rewarding and indeed encouraging for them to be able to see from within how the EU works. And I think the Economic Social Committee, to its credit, has opened indeed their house to membership, and some of our colleagues present here take advantage in those deliberations. And also the President of the Parliament has indicated there would be openness to doing the same for the house that we're currently sitting in. Hopefully that will happen. Right, there are a couple of hands already up. I will only ask you to introduce yourselves, name, affiliation, tell us where the question is going, and don't forget to put a question mark at the end. So a couple of lines.
Yes, good afternoon. Thanks very much for the opportunity to listen to this insightful conversation. I'm Blerta Hoxha from the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, International IDEA. We work with enlargement countries, supporting them to ensure elections integrity, rule of law, several areas of the fundamentals of EU accession. I have a bit of an obvious question for Mr. Heidleitner and Mr. Prebilic, but I sort of feel somebody has to bring this in the room, so I'll take a stab at this. If there is a support or sponsor of EU accession in the Balkans or in general enlargement countries almost equal to the EU, that is or was the US. And now, with the dismantling of US, democracy assistance as a whole, literally by the day, we are seeing, different aspects directly impacting the EU accession reforms being cut, from aid to Albania's reformed judiciary institutions, that was the key criteria for accession, to NGOs, working on elections, anti-corruption, even directly USAID projects supporting the Verkhovna Rada to be closer to the European Parliament. So my question is this, recognizing that this is unfolding, so, for you, for us, for all of us in the field, my question to you, Mr. Heidleitner and Mr. Prebilic, is whether there is any sort of reflection or rapid response, I could even call it, at the policy level, at the instrument level, going on for the EU on the side of EU institutions to respond to this void that is being caused and is shaking the ecosystem, which, as I argued, directly affects all the promoters and galvanizers of EU reform in the field. Thank you. Over.
Thank you very much. My name is Lukas Schäfer from the consultant agency Schumann Associates. Thank you very much for your rich explanations. I have a question for the two colleagues from the European movement in Serbia and Albania. So first of all, Mr. Hageleitner, you mentioned a balance function of Serbia between the Western Balkans and Ukraine, or a function that Serbia could maybe take over. I wanted to know, what is the perception of the populations in Serbia and in Albania about the fact that, on the one hand, in the Western Balkans, it has been a long way since Thessaloniki until today, a long way that the process is going. And on the other hand, we see in Ukraine and Moldova that, of course, because of the geopolitical context, it went a little bit faster. On the one hand, to gain the status as a candidate, but also to open the negotiations. And on the other hand, seeing the hypocrisy trap that was mentioned, is it something that you witness in your daily work when talking with the citizens? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all of your interventions. My name is Vitor Teixeira. I'm a senior policy officer at Transparency International EU office. And I have to say, a lot of what was been said by Ms. Hagleitner, sorry for mispronouncing your name, caused quite a bit of distress. So I'll raise one question and then hope I have more time for others. So a lot of issues were mentioned regarding Serbia. You mentioned the rule of law report, which is really a medium-term tool. But other speakers have clearly said that's not enough. But from your intervention, I understood that the Commission feels to a degree it seems to be enough. So my question is very specific. You also mentioned the Reform and Growth Facility for the Western Balkans. And it was already mentioned that nice statements might do a little bit of help, but don't go all the way. This facility, Article 21 specifically, allows for the withholding of funds in case of backsliding of democracy, rule of law, and so on. Now, my question is whether the Commission is willing and has even been a discussion of conducting targeted and progressive withholding of funds when the backsliding continues. Or will you allow for a Hungarian situation where there's a complete state failure before intervening? Thank you.
It there to chew. Thomas, you want to go first? There were a couple of questions targeted towards you, but also Vladimir, and then.
Yeah, I'll start first, probably on our American friends first. I mean, of course, it is early days, and we are aware that the cut of the assistance affects many NGOs as well. I mean, my understanding is that they are, in essence, doing a review. What American friends have told us, they're doing a review of assistance. This is what Rubio has announced. And he said that do a test on according to three questions. Assistance should be resumed if it makes the US stronger, safer, and more prosperous. Now, I'm not the spokesperson of the Trump administration, obviously, but what I would strongly argue is that EU enlargement doesn't only make the EU stronger, safer, more prosperous. It's in fact the first words in our enlargement strategy nearly each year, but it also makes the US stronger, safer, and more prosperous. Why? Because it makes them stronger in the sense because enlargement is a strong stabilizer in Europe. If they can focus their energy somewhere else, it makes them stronger. And just trying to anticipate the conclusions that they should draw in order to come back and supporting all these projects on enlargements. It makes them safer. We're working on whatever international organized crime. It's a big priority of the Trump administration. Makes the US more prosperous because they are used to work on the single market. Enlargement is about removing regulatory barriers, etc. So again, what I'm trying to say is, I would hope that once they have gone through their own analysis of all these projects you've mentioned, and it's true we've been working with them, and they've been quite supportive in the number of areas in the area to help candidate countries in the area of enlargement. They will also come to the conclusion that it is in their interest to continue pursuing this project. But I don't want to deny it's a serious situation, and I think as European Union, indeed, I think the field of reliable donors is getting smaller, and that is indeed something I think we all need to reflect on in the area of rule of law, democracy, etc. On the Western Balkans facility, well, it's getting a little bit technical on this thing. What you have mentioned is the nuclear option that we stop everything. This is Article 21. I mean, the backsliding, etc. But what you should be aware, surely you are aware, the Western Balkans facility is a performance-based instrument. Will only pay if the reforms that are in the reform agendas, which are publicly available for everybody to consult, if they are fulfilled. If not, we will not pay at all, or will only partially pay. Yeah. So I think that is, and there are reforms there in the area of rule of law. Now, just one more remark. I mean, what we are trying to achieve, obviously, with Serbia is to make them move forward on reforms, and it's a debate you can have whether the best way to do is to sanction a country or to withhold money or to take whatever other measures. But you can also choose a different way and try and push the country forward through more incremental reforms, with obviously the perspective that these reforms over time will develop a dynamic on its own and make it more difficult to go backwards. It's a discussion we can have, but it is not only one way. That's what I'm trying to say, to incentivize reforms.
Well, regarding the U.S. presence and facilitation of financial resources to this area, well, I think this was good assumption. Hopefully, this would not happen. We are all on the same, I would say, page here. However, if this may happen, I think that we have to be ready to step into the gap in quotation marks. So we have to deliver more in that perspective. So I think that within the European Parliament, there is, of course, we really don't have many powers in the European Parliament. One small power that is quite important for us is budgeting. So what we can do is, of course, we will come up forward, if this will be the case, to support and fill the gap with the resources. Why? Because the movement, or let's say development in process itself, should not be stopped, should not be hindered because of lacking financial resources. As I said before, openly, I understand that this is investment into future member countries and should not be considered as money given to a certain area without any kind of consequences. So this is basically good things for everyone. And well, the problem that we have here is, of course, if something European Union cannot do or European Parliament cannot do, is rapid response. Nothing is rapid in European Union. But nevertheless, if there will be something really difficult on the table, we will join all the efforts. And I can really say on behalf of the Parliament, when I talk to the other MEPs, there is quite a support for the enlargement. And I think if this will be the case, so the worst case scenario would come on the table, we will do everything in our capacity not to hinder the process of enlargement from this perspective.
Gladys.
Thank you very much. Well, how the hypocrisy trap is influencing perception on the EU integration. Well, this is actually one of the arguments of the EU's skeptics. They're actually using this hypocrisy trap as one of the arguments of being against joining the EU and seeing it as an unattainable goal. And it's something that we all must work together to counteract, because it's simply the whole issue is that the difference, I can tell you very, very simply, as let's say a regular citizen, even though I'm in the European integration business for the past 23 years, I've just realized, and I'm dedicated, and I dare not say that this is half of my current age. So I'm dedicated 100% to it. And even despite knowing the flaws, all kinds of traps, not only the hypocrisy traps, but I'm still dedicated to this process. The difference is that I can give on one negative argument 100 positive arguments. The Eurosceptics do not even want to hear one positive argument. They only stick to a negative, even if it's only one. So that's why the communication is very difficult. But what is very important, and this is, I'm calling upon the EU again, the solution to this is that the citizens want to feel tangible things on their lives. Right now, it has become an administrative political process. It's true. I'm very much for the reforms. I supported the reforms. I live and work for them. But it's also the truth that the citizens feel detached from it completely. And it's difficult for them to understand how something improves their lives, and you have to communicate this to them in a very, very simple language, not a technocratic administrative language. Another thing which is very important is that this, as I say, conditionality above conditionalities is enforced. And phased accession is not only for the citizens, but also for the workers in the public administration, which I think also are very important in changing this mindset. I'm participating in the one pilot program for phased accession, let's say. I'm participating in the European Economic and Social Committee's Enlargement Candidates Initiative. And I can only say the best words about it. Even though I know the job from the administrative side, I can say that the feeling of being there with the European family is a big time game changer. The third thing is that the communication must be more directed towards the citizens, not only to the political elites, is because of this youth that we have. The youth feels completely detached from the process. They feel that their opinion doesn't count, and they feel very much frustrated when they see democratic backsliding and political praises for something which is not the fact on ground. And that's where their frustration comes for the EU. So for us, this hypocrisy trap right now is the least of a problem, but it exists, definitely.
Well, yes, I will just to follow up. It was mentioned that the joining the process of Ukraine or Moldova, the fast track that has been followed. What are the perceptions? In truth, I would say that the perceptions generally are positive, as the process has been vitalized, also because of the situation and the war in Ukraine. And in general, I think that at least for Albania, that the perceptions are positive most of the time when EU acts, when there is resolvement in the decision-making process. While there is then a lot of skepticism or feeling or losing the credibility of EU when EU does not act, and we have seen it over the years, and also we see it now with other countries like North Macedonia, for example. So that would be my response.
I just forgot to give one example. Sorry, it'll be very short in comparison to how citizens of the biggest Eurosceptics in the region feel when they feel benefits. In 2009, when we had fully enacted the visa liberalization in my country, the support to the EU was more than 75%, around 75%. Now it's half than that. So this is the effect of tangible benefits towards the citizens directly.
Yeah, well, if we talk about public sentiment, just a couple of thoughts. First, to say that being very supportive of EU doesn't in itself mean always a lot. I mean, if I think of Romania and Bulgaria during their accession process, and this is something that I mention sometimes, so some of you might have heard me say it before, the levels of support were at 90, 100%. Okay, for the EU, and then they completely plummeted once the two countries joined the EU, because the citizens started to really understand the costs and the disadvantages also of the process. once inside the club, and what it really means, what it entails in terms of obligations and responsibilities. So I don't necessarily think that it has to be, the public support needs to be very high. It has to be realistic, if anything. And of course, one can debate what realistic is, but then the second point, I do not claim to be an expert on how people in the different countries feel, but my impression is that whether the public support is high or not for the EU, the real problem is actually that they, and I think Dragana alluded to that, is the fact that they don't really necessarily believe that integration will happen in the next 10 years or even longer. And that sense of, frustration that, this has been dragging on for 20 years. We're in a process that it's more rigorous, more complex than ever before. And actually, we cannot really hope to join the EU anytime soon. I think that has an impact that in the end it doesn't help. Also with the reform momentum, it has to be said. And finally, I think that public sentiment is also affected by the fact that after 20 years or so of reforms and requirements and, sometimes benefits, sometimes, austerity, in the end, prosperity, the promises that were made, don't seem to have been kept, or have successes haven't been registered with regard to prosperity. I mean, the convergence and the economic gap has widened, or it's extremely big, and there's not a lot of hope that it will close very time soon. In terms of democracy, despite all the best efforts from the Commission and the wonderful democratic conditionality that we've developed, enhanced compared to Romania and Bulgaria and the Central Eastern European wave, we still have huge problems with democratic standards in the region. And so, of course, at some point, people have to wonder, why do we do this for? Because it doesn't seem to be working out. Forgetting, of course, and not mentioning or forgetting that at the end of the day, enlargement is not only a technocratic process. It's very much a political, intergovernmental dossier. In which, of course, we get hung up on criteria and on conditions, but at the end of the day, it's whether we want these countries to come in and deal with problems, often common problems together, or we want to sing the melody of, you're not ready, you have to do some more work, and sort of fudge our way around commitment. So I think all of this, in the end, has an effect on public opinion, and the EU has its share of blame for that. And I forgot to mention, when it comes to Trump, I actually, because somebody mentioned lessons, and I feel that there's two other lessons with regards to Trump. And of course, by the way, we're still just 2 weeks into it, so it's crazy that so much is happening, and he's only been there for 2 weeks. But I feel that one thing that sets us apart from Trump is precisely the fact that we do things slowly. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because staying cool-headed and taking our time to respond, as opposed to the impulsive way of doing things that he has, might not necessarily be a disadvantage. That's one thing. But the second lesson has to do with predictability. And I think there we're actually more like Trump, dare I say, in the sense that the EU too has, or not the EU in institutional terms, not so much the Commission, but rather the member states have become very unpredictable when it comes to enlargement. And we should try to fight that instinct. It has to be that we do well on our promises, on our commitments, and we give the rewards when they are due. And this we haven't done in the past, and we should do differently again than how Trump is acting.
Indeed. Well, luckily, nobody has suggested turning any part of Serbia into a resort.
Yes.
The tower and
That would be Trump Tower, yeah. But great.
But one thing I wanted to chip in with regards to public perceptions, I think governments also have a responsibility there. We witnessed it as the European movement after the 2004 accession. They completely gave up on positive narratives, on all positive narratives around the EU. In fact, they realized the great opportunity of EU membership is allows you to appropriate all the successes and all the benefits of EU membership and then blame everything to Brussels. And that is something that has contributed also to the drop in public support, as well as cutting the funding for the European movement in those countries, which was indeed one of the main advocates for EU integration. But once they became a member, they didn't need it anymore.
Since we are talking about public support, I'm very surprised to hear that somebody mentions the connection between slow and good in terms of enlargement, because any slower than this, I think, and we will really get nowhere. And also a side effect of this very, very slow advancement on this process, I think, has been the othering that takes place in the societies, meaning the less consistently the EU engages with the Western Balkan region, the less people feel like they are part of the EU. They start then, okay, rather than being the losers of the EU accession process, we will rather tie our identity, if we already have some cultural ties with, let's say, Russia, we will rather tie with a force that is at least fighting. It gives them a sense of dignity, because anyway, the prosperity benefits are not visible.
Yes, thank you, Petros, and thank you for organizing this really great event. I'm Daniela Vancic. I'm from Democracy International. We're an NGO promoting citizens' participation worldwide, but especially in the EU. I have two questions. The first one is about the gradual integration. I think you mentioned really great, tangible, let's say, baby steps for integration that citizens would really feel on the ground. The EU data roaming, which is already in practice in some candidate states, and Serbia has this agreement with Greece as well bilaterally. And the idea for introducing observation status for candidate countries and MPs in the EP, these are great. I would be curious to know if there's any reflections, let's say, on expanding EU-funded projects, for example, Erasmus Plus, to the other candidate countries. Serbia and Turkey, for example, North Macedonia, I think, is already a part of that, but also the SERV programs, expanding this to candidate countries, and especially civil society there, entities there, because as Dragana rightly pointed out, there is this lagging in the Western Balkans, especially in Serbia, of understanding of the EU and its principles. And this would be a great way to then foster the civil society that does that work right now, doing it cost-free, actually promoting values that are foundational in Europe, democracy and participation, transparency, and so on. That's my first question. And then my second question is, well, first, there's a little bit of a misconception about the current situation in Serbia, that this is a standalone protest. It's not exactly just standalone. This is really a culmination of 10 years of protests and response to democratic backsliding in Serbia. This just happens to be the biggest ones, but over the last 10 years, they have been under different names: Serbia Against Violence, Don't Let Belgrade Drown. There was response to the December 2023 protests that were highly fraudulent, and I followed and monitored those on the ground. And so over the last 10 years, you can really name that there has been ongoing response to the democratic backsliding. All of these, though, and including the student-led protests right now, have one thing in common, and that's that they're calling for more democracy, more accountability and transparency, and that is in direct response to the backsliding of the current government. So I'd be interested to know if there is any appetite or interest for EU-led dialogues in the region. If this is something that's on the table, it would not be exactly really unusual, because there was in 2017 similar student-led protests in North Macedonia where the EU also stepped in. So just thinking forward, if there's any appetite for EU dialogue in this region right now. Thank you.
And I guess both of them are for Thomas, right? I guess. But yes, please.
Thank you. My name is André de Munter. I'm a desk officer for Bosnia-Herzegovina and Turkey in the European Parliament, and of course also keeping a close eye on all the other Western Balkan countries. As this is also a live stream, I need to stress that I'm speaking exclusively in a personal capacity. And by the way, it's impossible to speak on behalf of a European Parliament with so many members from so many member states. I would have a question for Dragana. Dragana, you were elaborating on the communication aspect. You didn't specifically refer to the role of EU delegations on the ground. And I think this is a very important issue. There are also huge divergences in how they communicate, how efficient they are in their communications. There have been studies commissioned by former MEPs also to look into how EU delegations contribute to efficient communication and making EU-funded or co-funded projects really visible, and the results sometimes are astonishing, but in the negative sense that there is no trace at all. Vladimir Previlic already referred to brother she, thank you, etc. I mean, where are we? And when you say we are bad in at PR, I think that is a very diplomatic formulation. So my question would be whether you have any experience on the ground with EU delegation, but not just Serbia. I mean, it applies to all countries. And would you say that there is potential for a greater role for the European Parliament in its scrutiny function to pay more attention to or to hold EU delegations with their huge staff more accountable? And I would summarize this by saying it's not enough, I mean, to win the hearts and souls of people by offering them a mug with EU Zatebe. And I would actually propose to turn it into Uztebe, which is a bit more balanced, maybe because I'm a Libra. And I have also a comment which is country specific about Serbia. And this has everything to do with credibility. I mean, for the second year in a row, we have Commission President von der Leyen going there. This time it was before the publication of the reports, praising the leadership, and contradicting the report of her own institution a couple of weeks later. I think this is highly problematic. And on the visit of Director General Koopman, and I know that it is very sensitive. I know that it is very problematic and that people have to tread carefully. But then when you look at the social media posts, it's just about the growth plan, which then, of course, triggers a lot of comments, the most polite ones being, what planet do you come from? And my question, which is a rhetorical one, would then be, I mean, what's the harm in posting on social media that you talked about a growth plan against the background, I'm trying to use the usual jargon, against the background of ongoing student protests and blockades, to at least indicate that you got a flavor of what was happening around you when you were having your meetings? Thank you.
Fair point indeed. And we're putting you a bit on the spot, Thomas, and you're not supposed to speak on behalf of the whole of the institution here, and not mistakes are on you. But there is one more question at the far of the table, and I'll bring you.
Yes. Hello to everyone. Thank you, Vladimir, for the invitation today. I'm Marko Vešliga, a member of the European Parliament from Croatia. Well, I will be very short. I have more comment than question. As you heard, I'm coming from Croatia, which is the neighboring countries to the Serbia, to Montenegro, to Bosnia and Herzegovina. Albania is also not far away. And of course, Croatian interest is to these countries so far as possible join to the European Union. We of course have some problems that most of them are burdened from the if you're back to the 90s, where was the collapse of the former Yugoslavia. But I think now is really an opportunity to accelerate this process, considering the new geopolitical environment, but also this protest of the students in Serbia, And I'm glad that here was emphasized also from the Vladimir, but also from some others people who was today in discussion. And I also think that we as European Union must get the stronger support to the students, because I think that they are fighting, if we heard what they demand from the government, they are fighting for some true European values. The transparency, the ruling of the law, the human rights. I think they are fighting against stolen country and really true for democracy. I mean, I know the political situation in Serbia, and probably this is the big movement. And like in every movement, it's very there are various powers in there. But I believe that this progressive powers is the most stronger in this movement. And I think we must support this. And maybe just a short comment just about this, the situation in this movement, if we have the informations. Are there, of course, there are students, there are young people, but I know that Euroscepticism, and we heard here today, are very strong in Serbia. They're also getting more strong in Montenegro. Are you believe that they really have the power for the true change and for true democratization of the Serbia, which is I think the only way then to get to the European Union as far as possible. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That was actually an interesting contribution to the discussion, and it's good to have you here. Thomas, would you like to perhaps address some of the issues raised, and then I will invite. There is one more question. Okay, let's squeeze it. I'm being told we need to leave here 3 sharp, so we can take certainly one more and keep it short.
Maybe I keep it quite short. I'm also one of the ECM's enlargement candidate members of European Economic and Social Committee, and one of the 16 from Turkey, because the country hasn't been mentioned here at all during the whole conversation. I felt the urge actually to mention the name. Because also for the Western Balkans, traditionally, historically, also currently with the popular culture, as well as with the economic projects that are going on, I think it is an important actor. And also when it comes to enlargement, Turkey has been a candidate country since 1999, though the relationship currently can at best be described as complicated, and the negotiation chapters are being on hold, but still it is an important actor when we are mentioning also the other external actors, Russia, China, etc., even United States, and everything was mentioned here aside from Turkey. I think we need to be more sensible and sensitive when it comes to all 10 enlargement candidate countries, including Turkey, especially when it is about the particular region. And I was wondering actually what my fellow ECM Dragana is also thinking about Turkish example and its effect on the Western Balkans. Is it a discouraging example among the enlargement candidate countries, among the accession countries, or do you get some lessons? Because we have been standing at these critical junctures you were mentioning and missing the fundamentals for a quite long time. Thank you.
Indeed, yes. There's no intention here other than the fact that we decided to focus on the Western Balkans because of the peculiarities in the region and the current juncture we are. But believe me, we are planning a similar discussion on Turkey, despite the fact indeed negotiations have been frozen for far too long.
Yeah, thanks a lot for all the questions, comments. I mean, again, let's be clear, as Commission, we're obviously fully aware what's happening in Serbia, and I wouldn't, and that shouldn't be questioned. I mean, someone asked about the sort of mediation. And I think actually that's more a question to the European Parliament, which actually is doing this in some countries. The Jean, through the Jean Monnet initiative, but that largely is between political actors. That it's not really the situation here between the authorities and here the population. I mean, again, a final comment on this. One shouldn't look at the region only at a bilateral level. I think what we are seeing as well, and is an impatience with authorities that are moving not fast enough, I think, on the path towards reforms. So if that is correct, then I think the best we can do is to move forward with those countries that are moving forward, indeed, on reforms and bringing them closer, because it will have an impact on the others, and I think that is also something that we will need to bear in mind. I think I'll stop it at that. Again, thanks a lot for the interest on enlargement, and keep it up. What will be happening in the coming months? Thanks.
Just before I move on to Thomas's question, I just want to refer to what Daniela also asked about the appetite of the EU to step in now in the situation in Serbia. We as a civil society have been calling upon the reaction of the EU, actually of the European Commission, mostly for the situation which is happening in Serbia. Now, I cannot, nor I'm going to allow myself to speak much on behalf of students, because number one, they don't want so, because they have detached themselves completely from the political movements, from the non-governmental movements. They're asking for credibility, accountability, rule of law, and respect for the fundamentals. But what we believe as a civil society that it is essential to do right now, I can understand, having worked in my previous posts in many administrative jobs, I can understand the limitations of such jobs, but still there should be an action from the European Commission other than declaratory one, in terms of acknowledging at least that these kids are requesting the fundamental values which have been neglected for a long time, unfortunately, which has shown what can happen on one case, and we do not want to see it happening further on the whole system. So we see this as very important. And as a response to my fellow Libra, on the European delegations involvement, we see it as very important. Now, I am not going to give myself the right to grade the work of the EU delegations, as this is someone else's job. What I can say is that there is involvement, but it obviously, as per your introduction, it varies from situation to situation. So I guess that this should be looked from one situation to another. We have been inviting the EU delegation to follow us in our public events, because we're organizing series of, our European Movement to Serbia is organizing series of consultations with the citizens across the country in many towns and cities, where we're having public and open debates about benefits of joining the EU. And we're also very much open of discussing the skepticism and why they're upset, what they mind about the EU and so on. And on most of the occasions, I do have to say the European delegation accompanies us, and they join us in the discussion, and they're willing to take on board even the criticism and unpleasant situations and so on. Another thing that I wanted to say on the public diplomacy, which definitely has a lot of room for improvement, I can say that the House of Europe, or the European House actually, which opened in Belgrade recently, has contributed a lot to the visibility of the European Union in a positive way. Now, Belgrade and the rest of the country are completely different things, I have to say. Sometimes I have a feeling like we're living in a specific Belgradian bubble. So this is more than necessary to have across the whole country, even in smaller towns. Not only EU houses, but EU corner is something where not only debates will take place, but also cultural events and all other public events that can support bringing people closer to the European Union, because I've seen positive effects of the Europe House in Belgrade, and I do expect it to grow to the other cities across the country.
And in many ways, that's the purpose also of civil society.
Yes.
To get the message out there beyond
Yes, definitely.
big cities, but also the usual circles. Corina?
Yeah, no, just very shortly. The one thing I would say, however, about the protest, and I think they, as was mentioned, they are on the right side of history, and one can very much sympathize with their demands and what the students are saying and calling for. But I do feel that at the end of the day, for change to happen and for their demands to be met, you need political action. So being in isolation and can only go so far in terms of, I mean, it's one thing to make your voice heard, but it's another thing to walk the talk. And to walk the talk, I think one would probably need either that they cooperate with political forces or that they become political forces themselves, because ultimately policy happens in a situation in which you govern or you are part of political power, and I think that's where we hit a wall a little bit. And I remember being in a similar dilemma also in the past when the protests in Bosnia and Herzegovina happened. Where as much as you agree with what is being called for, unless the young generations want to take a political role, want to assume a political role, want to get into politics or to work with politicians to try to bring change from inside, it's very difficult for them to have a strong impact. And that might be a sad reality and might not be easy to achieve. But we have to be also brutally honest about this aspect, I feel.
But we have perhaps overstayed our welcome here. I would just say that this is something that both my organization, but also everybody around me, are very much invested in. And we take heart from the fact that your participation here indicates that you are as invested in it as we are. And we will certainly continue that effort. I'd like to thank you, Vladimir, for hosting us today, but also for the thought leadership and the vision you have provided through your work in general, but also with what you said today. Many thanks also to you, Thomas. I know you are in a difficult position, but I think for better or worse, it is important to engage in these conversations. Many thanks to Gladys and Dragana, my colleagues from the European movement in the region. I think the work you do is fantastic. And of course, both Corina and Iliana, I think it's very important to have that contribution from the think tanks as well. Lastly, many thanks to both the team of Vladimir, but also the team of the European movement for making this event possible. We are delighted to be the platform for debate and discussion on some crucial issues. And of course, many thanks to you. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a nice afternoon.